All right, so I'm going to go and joined by my co-host Drew Sersky. So Drew is going to be running the chat today. Drew also has a great question for Seth. We were talking about what do we want to learn because I'm bringing people that Drew hasn't met before. So Drew's got a great perspective on this. Drew is a former KW team leader, productivity coach. So Seth Levin is the number one KW agent in New York City. And I met him because Seth is very active in this luxury community, giving back. And Seth came and uh, heard him teach how to build a luxury business with no sphere. Like, how do you come to a new city like New York, break in and into what's arguably the hardest, most competitive real estate market in the country, right? If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And the message is really simple. I'm not going to steal Seth Thunder. It's to treat everyone like luxury, right? And but he has a really great tactical framework to think about this in an organic, natural way. But Seth has just been an incredible resource in all the time that I've known him. I've gotten to spend time with him. He's hung out with my daughter, taught her about, they've had some deep conversations. He came to Knoxville and shared with us. So he's just been a really incredible resource because here's what I found, y'all. We're in a very difficult business, but the realtors, the agents we're bringing you, there's one thing in common. People that are very successful in this industry tend to be givers. They tend to have a really high EQ, right? And it's not a coincidence, right? They become like hubs for their clients and other agents send them referral business. So Seth is going to be talking to us today about negotiation. Seth, give us a little snippet of your background. Like, how'd you get in? How'd you end up in the place where, did you grow up thinking I want to go be a real estate agent and I want to sell Manhattan, or give us some background on how you got to where you are.
No, I definitely did not grow up with aspirations of becoming a real estate agent. It was something that I fell into about 22 years ago. Was actually doing some real estate investment, and I thought I would just get my license sort of as, almost like a lark or just, a little something to have in the tool belt. And then before I knew it, I just had some very influential people that I met very organically through shared interests, which I truly think is the only way to get real genuine connectivity with people of influence is on their turf. So it's got to be something that you're, really, you know, authentically able able to speak to and to be genuine about. I'm a big proponent, supporter of the arts. And I've met a lot of these people through art events, places where I can actually speak. And, 22 years, the first basically decade and a half at Douglas Elliman, I was top 20 in the company. And that was literally just something I fell into. Came over to Keller Williams, and our team has been the number one team in New York City most years that we've been here, top three in the state multiple times. And we're a very small team. So we were talking about building a business through relationships. About 97% of my business is either referred to me by agents around the country. That's about almost half my business. And a lot of that's just, from, again, loving on real estate agents. Even the real estate agents in my own market, I look at them as a resource. I only look at them as competition for about 5 seconds. I think one of our biggest advantages is relationships within the real estate business in general and the local business. And they were having a little chat about building bricks. I look at it as planting seeds, watering those seeds, and you grow trunks, the trunks of your business. And I could point to about 5 trunks in my business that have led to all the branches, that have led to all the fruit. And then once I harvest fruit, I'm planting more seeds. And one of my big things is don't work by price point, really truly work by relationship. And I have a pretty high price point. I work, with $10 million listings, $5 million buyers, but I also work with $400,000 buyer in 2015 led to about $100 million worth of business because, I knew that she was a person of influence. She was very young. So I worked with her personally. I'm still in production, even though I have a team. And I work with referrals and I work with past clients, which is why I have a 97% work with people that I know business. but I knew that this was a person of influence. And just in 2021 alone, I think I closed $35 million worth of her friend's business personally, not my team. So it's, it's that kind of business. And, before I get into anything, I will tell you a conversation I have with everybody. I mentioned to them the first time I meet with a buyer, typically on the telephone, or the first time I meet with a seller in person, before I have really locked in their trust. I'm using a lot of resources I have, market information. I'm also just asking a ton of questions and trying to uncover motivation so that I can align with motivation. But something that I always say is, lucky for you, regardless of if you transact today or if you transact tomorrow or if you never transact, you've got one of the top real estate experts in New York City as your advisor for life. And you've got me for free anytime that you need information, and I'm here for you. And if you do transact in the future, that's great. That's how obviously I get paid, but I'm your resource, I'm your consultant, I'm your advisor for life, regardless if I ever get paid. And that locks in some trust.
Can I hit that beat? Because, right, if you haven't interacted with Seth, if you spend time talking with him, Seth is a humble guy, and that is I think an accurate depiction of he's one of the best agents, the very best consultants in New York City, right? And so I've got to stand up and deliver my value and let people know I've got you, right? I've got to be able to like know my craft and then effectively communicate it, because what a disservice if Seth didn't tell people, right? That you don't have to go anywhere else. You've got somebody in your corner for the rest of, right?
Eternally.
Yeah. Drew, I think, had a great question, Seth, that might kick us off into like a really natural flow, but I love it. Drew, what was your question for Seth?
So, two things. First, hearing the word referral so many times this early in the morning gives me the warm and fuzzies, right? Because that's where I love to live is in the referral. Thank you so much for just sparking my day off with that, my favorite word. Second, Seth, we're here to talk about negotiating. What do you think makes a really good negotiator?
Well, obviously there's innate, there's the ability to read between lines, but I don't think you need to have that. I think that's an advantage, and that gives you sort of a natural springboard into negotiation. But this can be learned. It's when to pause. It's what questions to ask, how to uncover motivation. People talk about negotiation as two people, basically competing with each other to dominate and get the preferred outcome. But I'm actually, the water's warm, come on in. Air travels to areas of low pressure. So I'm more of, is it judo or jujitsu? Not sure, where you're actually using the energy of somebody else and you're creating, you know, I think through storytelling and uncovering questions, you are able to guide people, to breadcrumb them to make the right decisions, whether they're a client, the right decision working with you, the right decision staging, the right decision, pricing something correctly, or having your preferred strategy to going into a best and final bidding situation. It's breadcrumbing people, by uncovering their motivation, asking the right questions. We don't know how to talk to people. We don't know their concerns. We don't know anything if we're not asking the right questions. So it's really about uncovering motivation, whether it's somebody on the other side or whether it's somebody on your side. You don't know how to really interact with them, what you can achieve if you don't know what their motivation is. And it's also, again, it's about breadcrumbing people to make the right decisions and breadcrumbing them away from making the wrong decisions. I don't tell people what to do. Through market analysis, through experience, through telling stories of success, I'm trying to guide people to make the right decision. And through cautionary tales, I'm trying to guide them away from making the wrong decisions. And oftentimes that wrong decision is not taking my price for a buyer because I'm using a cautionary tale of them waking up with nothing. And I love to understand the motivation of the agent that I'm dealing with. Like, if they've had a couple of deals fall apart, that's when I, sort of try to pull the urgency behind my person, right? I'm trying to let them know that there's other options for us and we're only here for a certain period of time and then we have to move on. Not by 5 o'clock, if you don't take this, we're out. It's, in basically, just dropping little seeds to let them know that we have something else and we're going to move on, but we're here for right now and we're ready to go. So it's push and pull and understanding who you're talking to.
I love that answer. I thought I was a great negotiator until my daughter became a teenager. And then I realized I lose every time. So it's great to hear. I love the breadcrumbing, right? I love that. That's amazing.
Yeah, and kids are negotiators. I always joke that if I had $1 for every time my parents or teachers told me, Seth, this is not a negotiation, I would never have gotten into real estate because I would have been retired. But I think every conversation we have is a negotiation, and we've got to remember that the first time we're talking to a potential buyer, the first time we're talking to somebody, an agent on the other side, even if it's just before a showing, like we've got to remove negatives and set expectations for a future negotiation the first time we talk to anybody. And back to the story of my parents and teachers, I would say I'm not negotiating. I should have said, of course I'm negotiating. Everything's a negotiation, but this is just one I'm going to lose. Because every interaction we have is a negotiation. And we've got to really have that mindset, because whatever you say is going to get cemented in somebody's mind. And even when you show people information and proof that that's not necessarily, the reality here, it's already cemented in people's minds. So like, if I have a listing that, for instance, I had a listing East 75th Street a couple of years ago, we were ready to list for 1.2 million. That was apartment 4A. Same apartment, 4 floors higher with a better view, sold for 800. How the heck am I going to sell for 1.2? I did some research. I found out that it was a co-op. Co-ops in New York City. I won't get into the nuance. You're just lucky that you don't have them. But it was the lowest price that they would allow their shareholder to sell to his child. So I found that out. So before people even came in the door, we would say, as I'm sure you saw, apartment 8A sold for 800,000. This is why that's not applicable here. What did I do? I removed the negative. I set an expectation for this one, but I also did what I, truly believe is the best thing to do with real estate agents: flatter them. As I'm sure you saw, they didn't see that before they came in the door. They didn't do the research. What else? They'll do that afterwards. But I removed that negative before it becomes a thought, because it's really hard to talk people. As we know, we see this polarized world and country we're in right now. It's hard to talk somebody out of a thought these days if something's already cemented in them. So we're really trying to get ahead of things and sort of plant those seeds for the future negotiation before it becomes something that's cemented in their minds. And I can't stress that enough. I have so many anecdotes. I can do that. I could just talk about this, removing negatives and setting expectations by flattering, by, bringing something to somebody's, attention before it gets cemented. I want to bring the negative, the worst thing, right up front and then remove it. I don't want to hide it before it somehow gets cemented without us even, being part of the process.
So Seth, you mentioned that everything is a negotiation. Can you just expand on what that means to you, right? When you say everything is a negotiation.
So the first time I speak with a prospective client on the phone, I have a cheat sheet for if I don't know. It's a buyer consult. Before I get on the phone, I try to find as much information about what they're looking for. And I am big into market analytics, not only because I think it helps guide us, but it also helps us differentiate and show value. So I have a cheat sheet with 12 different metrics before I speak with anybody. And they're metrics that you can't get, as a consumer by looking at Zillow, by looking at homes.com. It's not just what's on the market price. It's ways to compare and basically market score individual market segments. And it's stuff that they don't have access to. So you're showing your value the first time you speak with a prospective buyer, and that's a negotiation. First negotiation is conveying your value. So I have, my favorite is market pulse. That's the ratio of pending to active. And it shows a relative market score for each individual market. Then I have average discount from ask. How many average days on market, but everything is month over month, year over year. So I can get as granular as the person on the other side needs to trust that I am the expert, right? So that's my first negotiation is value. And especially these days where we didn't used to work buyer agreements. I've been doing this 22 years. I got my first buyer agreement signed in the last couple of months. I essentially, have built enough trust and enough credibility and shown my value that I didn't have to. But all of a sudden, I'm having no issue getting, any kind of exclusive buyer agreement where other people are getting sort of those more temporary ones that we have in New York, because it's the same thing I've done with sellers forever. It's through gaining trust, of course. What's the first way to gain trust? The first way to gain trust is to show that you're a resource. So all these analytics that I have, I used to do on my own. Now I have a data analytics company. Yes, they're specific to New York, so you have to find somebody else. But I press a button, and for any market segment, whether it's the co-op market in Chelsea, 3-bedroom, I have 12 different analytics month over month, year over year that I can talk to people. But it's also incredible to be able to compare and contrast different. And I'm going to jump because I don't have, usually I have about 2 hours when I do my negotiation training. So I'm going to jump around a touch. But it's also, you're negotiating it's not always against people, right? Sometimes you're negotiating to get them to do the right thing. So I sold for past client Elizabeth a $700,000 1-bedroom co-op in Chelsea when she was single, and she was there maybe for about 10 years when I bumped into her in a restaurant and she introduced me to her new husband. And I said, "Oh, this is incredible." She said, "Yeah, and we're pregnant." I said, "Oh my God, that 1-bedroom apartment's not going to really do the trick for you guys for much longer." She said, "Yeah, this was 2019." She said, "Yeah, but the market's so bad, we want to wait." I knew that the 1-bedroom market in Chelsea was doing really well. So I said to her, it's actually, there's a lot, and this is always the case. There's a lot going on in the market. There are ways to take advantage of any market. It's not always the time for you to buy. It's not always the time for you to sell, but there's always some kind of arbitrage going on in the market. And if you can differentiate different market segments to somebody, you can guide them to making the right decision, which in this case worked out incredibly well for her. Went over to her place. I showed her, market pulse for 1-bedroom co-ops in Chelsea was 1.2, meaning there's more in contract than there is actively listed on the market. She wanted to buy a 3-bedroom condo. At the time, I showed her the market pulse for that type of purchase was 0.14, meaning there was about 7 times as much active as there was in contract. So there's 2 markets going on at the same time. There's always multiple markets. And you got to talk about market segments and be able to differentiate that. So what did we do? We listed her place for 1.2. Nothing in her building had ever sold at that price for a 1-bedroom, cash within a couple days. She bought a 3-bedroom condo that was originally listed for 4.75, new development, lowered price to 4 million. We got it for 3.25. That apartment today is worth 5. So if we just stayed with the, sort of the colloquial wisdom, the market's weak, okay, you can wait. She would have lost out on this incredible arbitrage opportunity where she made about $2 million. So it's speaking to people's concerns. It's not overcoming objections, right? Because overcoming objections, I think of like a tennis racket. You're batting away balls. That's not dealing with it. You think you beat them. Speaking to concerns is actually listening to something and coming up with a creative solution, or just something that that you can tell a story about, whether it's, it's staging. I've, incredible experience where I went into a building to meet with a 96-year-old seller. The guy wanted to maximize every dollar. He was really optimistic for, the life ahead of him at 96 years old. He wanted every dollar. He was going to hire the building, quote unquote, expert. I asked, how much did she say this apartment was worth? 1.4. I thought it was worth 1.5 in its condition, but I said a paint job, a little bit of late staging, meaning taking some of your stuff out. I think we can get 1.6. Wound up hiring me. That agent for the building came in first open house and said, this is so overpriced, it'll never sell. That 1.6, I got 1.7. Or sorry, I got 1.75. Sorry. Somebody came in. I knew that we were the only 2-bedroom in Gramercy, high floor, under 2 million. I knew this guy wanted it. So instead of doing a negotiation, I said to him and his agent, I said, if you really want this, obviously there's a lot of interest here. I don't say, oh, we've got offers when we don't. There's a lot of interest here. I think if you want this and there's a lot of value here, an offer of 1.75, you'll get it and we'll take it off the market. Couldn't wait to tell that agent who came into my open house and said, this is so overpriced, you'll never get it, that I just made them an extra 25% over what she was willing to get for them. That's a story now that I walk in to every listing with to overcome a building expert, a neighborhood expert. Yeah, neighborhood experts are tied, or building experts typically are tied to the most recent comp in that building, in that neighborhood. Markets are fluid, markets are dynamic, and buyers are not just looking in this building or this neighborhood. So you need somebody like me that can contextualize value across different market segments in order to maximize this opportunity for you and not just be tied to a most recent comp. Talked about a $10,000 paint job leading to $350,000, 25% above what this neighborhood expert was targeting. So I walk in with a prop. I actually walk in with the brochure for that to breadcrumb people to making the right decision. A, which is hiring me. B, is trusting me. But C, how to overcome the concern of, I want to use this person that's done 20 sales in this building, in this neighborhood. So how do we overcome that? We do it with storytelling, breadcrumbing people to make the right decision. So, I mean, I've got thousands of stories about how to do this.
Yeah. Seth, what I'm really taking away from this, and I love it, is that this market segmentation and being able to contextualize information across the market is going to be the thing that separates agents in the future. Because one of the things I have is that the consumer is going to be able to ask for specific data on ChatGPT to understand, like, who's the best listing agent here, or who helps negotiate the best deals, or what's happening in the market, right? But it's just one sliver of information. You're going to have to conceptualize all over the market. And the only way to do that is by being a good storyteller and being able to contextualize that information. And so I just want to put it out there, because I remember thinking, man, this information is going to become democratized, right? And it's going to be hard for people to separate themselves, like an experienced person and a new person. But you just kind of squashed that in my mind a little bit, right? Have you thought at all about how AI is going to democratize information for the consumer?
100%. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, when I first got into the business, people used to walk into our open houses with New York Times with the property, circled. There really was no aggregator or, pool of data for consumers outside of the real estate agent. So I actually thought that the business was going to get really tough when the aggregators put all the listings out there. But I actually have grew to really enjoy it, because there's ways to collaborate with people more these days. So it's not a race to find a listing. And I take that negative off right away. I say, what I'm here to do is guide you to great opportunity and guide you away from problematic opportunity, because there's a lot of problematic pieces of real estate out there. There's a lot of places where you're not going to see the appreciation. There's going to be issues with this building, whether it's a history of assessments or something that I know about the financials of the building that I'm going to be able to guide you away from. So it made it so that if somebody found something without me, that was not an issue, because I said it's not a race to find inventory. It's a race to collaborate to maximize the opportunity.
Mm.
So I tell them,
Seth,
if you're not sleeping at 3 in the morning, you're going to be looking for your real estate. I'm not. So it, you know, but then with AI, but Rob, you had something,
oh, I was just gonna say, Lauren had a question, and I had the same question. Um, you know, just tell us a little bit more about the data points. Or she actually said, can you send us all 10 data points that you pull?
sure. Yeah. No, it's average listing discount if something sells within the first 30 days. It's average listing discount across the market. There's a liquidity chart, which basically just talks about, how things are selling in the market segment in general. But I could share it. It's about 12 data points. But I love the story about average listing discount if things sell within the first 30 days, because it helps me talk to sellers and show if you're on the market for less than 30 days, the average listing discount is 0.2%. If you're on the market more than 30 days, the average listing discount is 5.4%. So what does that tell us? That tells us we want to be in the market from the start. And if somebody wants to overprice, I mean, if it's really outrageous, I don't want the listing. But if it's a little outrageous, I'll take it. But I'll build into the listing agreement that within 14 days, if we're dropping the price 5%. And I build that in so that it's not a negative that I have to, spring on them at a certain point. Oftentimes they come to me and say, Seth, it's been 2 weeks, time to lower the price. And I've got this incredible story where somebody came to me about lowering the price. And I said, hold on, no, don't do that. We've got somebody who's come 3 times. And when they came and I showed this property myself, because we do that a lot of times with our luxury properties, especially in New York with doorman buildings we're showing. But I wanted to show this one because it was a third time. They came with their 7-year-old daughter. They're walking around and I said, are you guys only looking up to 2 million? And they said, no, we can go up to 2.5. I looked and, I knew that there was no other property like this under 2.5 million in this area. They wanted to be in this specific school district. Now I had a specific geographic order for where they were looking. I knew that they wanted to be in this school district. It's May at this point. If they wanted to be in the school district, they had to be registered at a certain time, and co-op takes about 3 months to close. I knew that they needed to buy this today. So I called the agent, who was one of the top corporate agents in the country. This wasn't, some newbie that I was just pushing around. And I said, because of the level of interest on this property, we're going to best and final deadline 5 o'clock on Thursday. The level of interest was them. I uncovered that the level of interest was them. They bid about 7% above ask, and we broke a record for that building for 2-bedroom. I had my clients write a letter to the entire building and the adjacent buildings telling them, what I had done. I wrote it, they signed it, to be perfectly honest. And I got about 10 listings from that letter. So it's not only doing what's right for your clients, but by doing right for them, people want to support you. People want to advocate for you when you've done right by them. So some of the best things I've ever done, I told you about that $400,000 buyer that led to about $100 million, $80 million worth of referral business. I got that buyer from talking her friend out of purchasing a $3 million apartment because I knew the time frame for him wasn't right. I told him to rent. So it's also, we're not only just negotiating just to win, we're negotiating. Part of that is to uncover people's goals and motivation. And sometimes understanding that their goals and motivations aren't a today, it's not a today piece of action, is, going to bear way more fruit than pushing somebody into a bad purchase, a bad sale, and then them being upset with you and never, because these things are like little embers that catch on fire, and everything needs to become wildfire in your business. And you're just putting out these embers when you push people into the wrong, the wrong decision, wrong situation.
Seth, I'm sure there are agents on here that have worked with that buyer that is just not making the right offers to win, right?
Mhm.
what stories or what breadcrumbs or what negotiation or what data, like what
Yeah.
is your process for that to help people on this?
Okay. I love this. This is one of my favorites. I was actually just on a New York specific real estate podcast the other day, and I was talking about this, and I think this is so huge for when you're in competitive markets and you've got buyers that just keep missing out. And it's really because of you. It's because you didn't explain to them the right mindset around this stuff. You don't want people overpaying, but you also don't want people to be connected to asking price. You know, I say this from the beginning. Asking price is just a marketing construct decided by a seller and a real estate agent. It has absolutely nothing to do with value, right? So what we want to do for each property is differentiate asking price from value, and we're going to come up with a value before we go into any type of negotiation on these properties that's independent. It's agnostic of asking price, right? So recently I went into Park Slope. You know, there's no inventory, huge demand. Everybody wants to live in Brooklyn, which is why I moved here about 3 years ago, because I knew that this is where we're going to see crazy appreciation. Manhattan's a little stunted. Everybody's moving a little bit, out. I live 100 feet out of Manhattan, but like, Brooklyn and Queens that are commutable to Manhattan, these are really prime areas, and everything was going into bidding situations in Park Slope. And this was an older woman who wanted to be closer to her 2 children and her multiple grandkids who live in Brooklyn. She sold her place in Pennsylvania, was moving here. She lost a couple because she couldn't get over asking price. She would maybe go a couple thousand over asking price. And even though I was trying to really get her over that hump. So what I do is I said to her, this property was asking 1.25. We looked and, I showed her my analysis, and I got her to about 1.3 as what we agreed the value was. So we're going to go in at least at 1.3, right? But then I have the conversation with her. I understand her motivation and goals. She wants to be in this apartment for the rest of her life. She said, that's about 20 years. And I said, okay, well, with average appreciation of 4% per year, you're going to see about 80% appreciation for this property. What percent of that appreciation are you willing to trade in order to get this today? So we decided that she was willing to trade a year and a half of appreciation, 6%. So she bid 6% over the 1.3, not over the 1.25. So we got her to understand a value of 1.3, but then to bid 6% above that to trade a little bit of future appreciation and equity to get the apartment today, because we're in a market that is going up, and it's going up rapidly. So that's 6%. If you wait 6 months, you're probably going to lose that 6% anyway. But now you're getting the property you want today, and you're going to be there for 20 years. And this doesn't work for someone that's going to be somewhere for 3 years trading future appreciation and equity. So you got to understand who you're negotiating with, who you're advocating for, who you're talking to, because everybody's different. We've got sellers that want to move to Florida. They've been in their home for 40 years. They might not need to maximize every dollar, but they want to do it quick. They want to do it painlessly. They want to do it without renovation, whatever it is. So you got to understand that consumer. But then there's the person who bought a property for $2.5 million 2 years ago. And if they don't sell it for 2.8, they can't buy the next property. So then you've got a different strategy with that person, right? So, I mean, long and short, it's about setting expectations, right?
Seth, this is a masterclass. And if I can, I'm just gonna translate some of it back down to, like, this is amazing. Rob and I are nodding, been in the business 17 years, like, this is fantastic. And if you're new, maybe translate some of this back down to, like, I was thinking a couple things. Like, you may not have the market analytics where you can understand liquidity, because I'm like, oh, Rob asked 2 questions. He said, hey, how do you talk someone into like not asking a crazy price? And how do you talk a buyer how do you ask for a price reduction? And how do you convince buyers to make offers that are realistic? And for you, it sounds like, hey, I'm using data to drive those things. I'm starting the conversation off with data in both directions, where I'm using the data to drive that price reduction on the front end. Hey, we know this is what stuff sells for, and you get that really finite data. What I've seen in most markets, though, is most agents aren't if you just differentiate by zip code or neighborhood, the markets, and if you just do an analysis by price point of like, hey, actually, there's 3 months of inventory, but from 600 to 700, there's 7 months of inventory.
Exactly.
Like no one is even doing that level of analysis. Like you can differentiate yourself. And when you said, I wanted to land on one thing, asking price is a construct between a listing agent and a seller that has no relationship to value.
Exactly.
That's something I've had such a hard time, but you went deep on how you give an alternative. Hey, here is where value is coming from. Here's how we're thinking about value. Here's how we're looking at future appreciation of the asset, because so many people, they want to be good negotiators and we're more motivated by fear of loss. So they're so tied to like not overpaying, or, you go win the negotiation successfully and then they're filled with doubt. Like, oh my God, I must have paid too much because this wasn't painful enough.
Exactly. So one of my, I've, Seth's negotiation musts, and I have a whole list of them. One of them is not lying. That's first and foremost. We're using and contextualizing concise pieces of information as opposed to not telling the truth. Like I know which breadcrumbs are going to get the buyer to make a high offer on my listing. I don't say, oh, we've got all these offers when we don't. I always talk about the high level of interest, the high level of demand on this property. I never talk about, and I've had agents on the other side that I caught in a lie. And then I know that if they're telling me they have another offer and I know that they don't, because I've got ways of figuring that out, that's when I'll take the approach of making something really fleeting, for lack of a better term. Like, yeah, you've got this offer from us, but we only see value up to here. Not, oh, we feel. Never use words like we feel, we think. No, we see value. We've got a pretty savvy team on this side, savvy real estate agent, savvy buyer. We see the value here. If you guys don't want it, go with the other person. God bless. We're going to keep looking for other property. But if you don't, wind up moving forward with that other person, it's before we find something else, we'll probably still be here. So I'm not closing the door, but I know that now they've got to go back to their seller and say, oh my God, I lost 2 potential buyers. I know who I'm negotiating with. I want to put the fear into them of having to go back to their seller. So now, I've got an anecdote where we were willing to go up to 1.85. We got something for 1.75 because I caught them in the lie. That lie cost their seller $100,000. So, we don't lie. We ask questions. We leave space for people to talk, especially real estate agents. They love to talk. You got to be the person that loves to shut up and listen, because you get way more information from listening than you do from talking. There are times where you need to talk, but more often than not, you need to listen in a negotiation. And the person that listens more typically wins.
Are you using questions or are you using statements to get that other agent to elicit that additional information? Because it sounds like you are more concise. You're not oversharing, right, Seth? You're trying to
Yeah,
keep.
I think we're in the business of extracting information, from people on the other side of a negotiation, not from especially giving your clients, motivation away. So we're really trying to understand motivation, right? First and foremost. So how do I extract information? How do I get agents on the other side to speak and to talk? I mean, as simple as saying, oh, I see you're offering 1.7 million for this. Interesting. What are they going to do? They're going to fill that awkward silence, right? And they're going to
Just
give me a
drop the
piece,
mic, Seth. Yeah.
yeah, and they're going to give me a piece of information. They're going to say, well, it's an opening offer. Da, 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 da. Okay, now I can go back to my seller and say, it's an opening offer. I think we can negotiate, pretty firm here. Or they'll say, you know what, this is where they see value. They've got offers on 5 other properties, but if you'll take something like this, they'll move forward with you. Guess what? That's also good information. it's not the information I wanted, but it's good information because now I can go to my sellers who are moving to Florida, who I know they're not stuck on every dollar that they could get from this property. And I could say, you know what, we've got a bird in hand. It doesn't seem like these people are going to come up. I know that we've been on the market for 45 days. You had a goal of being sold in 20. Here's an opportunity. It's not something you need to take. However, I have a cautionary tale of people that didn't take the offer and had to wait another 70 days, do price reductions, whatever it is. And maybe they make the decision that they want to take this. But it's information that I get. I mean, another way is just will say to somebody, as I'm sure you're a good agent, as I'm sure apartment 1715, right under this one, sold last year for 690,000. You're asking 725. What can you tell me? And they're going to tell me, oh, my sellers, need this or need that, or there's some room to negotiate here, whatever it is. I'm asking that question and then I'm pausing. I'm saying interesting and then I'm pausing. When I send an offer to an agent, I have a cover sheet with all the high level points in bold in the first paragraph. I don't press send until I get them on the telephone and I know that they can talk. Then I press send. They open up the email offer and they always read those high level bolded details to me. They'll read, they're offering 1.5 million, 75% cash. Ooh, contingent on financing. I'm going to hear whatever the pain point is. Then I can go back to my client and say, I don't think we've got to really move on price. I don't think we've really got to move on closing date. But if we want to get this, we might have to talk about creative ways to work around a mortgage contingency. But I didn't get that information from pressing send on something and waiting for an email to come back. I wanted to hear their first, natural, gut reaction to everything. Right. So, it's letting people talk. And I'm not saying, yeah, but we need, in this market, da, 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 da. I'm just getting information. I
I
don't
love when you
need,
said, what can you tell me?
yeah,
Right? Think about receiving that. I was like, that's not, you're not challenging anyone. I mean, you are, you're asking for information, but I cannot get defensive when you just point out, hey, the neighbor sold for 690. This is 725. What can you tell me?
it's diplomacy, it's flattery, it is creating low pressure. Because if I could create low pressure with the other agent, I think of it as like being conspiratorial, even though I'm not giving them any information. I'm being conspiratorial in the way that I'm acting with them. I'm not betraying anything on my side. I'm trying to get them to betray a little bit on their side, right?
Seth, what's we're wrapping up here, and this is when Seth says he can teach this class for 2 hours. Do we all see I would
Easily.
show up for that 2 hour class, right? This is he's come and presented before, and we'll make sure Seth is in the network. What's the biggest mistake you see other agents make in negotiating? Like if I could change one thing, remove one habit, like what's the one tactic I can take away today?
I mean, I think the biggest one is that agents are afraid of negotiation. And, they're trying to be too careful, which, you do have to be careful of, keeping information, about asking the right questions, about framing things the right way. But these have to be human to human conversations. And I think that people put a wall up and they're trying to be too combative, where I think I'm a pretty darn good negotiator and I do really well for my clients, but the agents on the other side always thank me after the closing. Thanks for making this so rewarding. Thanks for, being so cooperative. Guys, I'm winning a negotiation from my perspective for my client, but I'm having the other side thank me. So a lot of this is come on in the water's warm, right? And I think, people are so afraid of negotiation that they do this a little too rigidly. And you get more information when there's an interplay between people. And oftentimes I can extract the most out of a real estate agent that I know really well, because there's a certain, level of comfort. So when I'm curating information with them, they're taking it and they're becoming an agent working for my client. My client is best served when they have two agents working for them, right? So I try to create situations where there's two agents working for my clients. And that doesn't happen when you're trying to bully. That doesn't happen when you're being confrontational. I am such a flatterer. I tell people, oh my God, I've been in your position a million times. I know what it's like to have a seller that is so overpriced and seems like this entrenched and stubborn. Oh my God, I will do everything I can to help you out here.
Seth,
Yep.
you should have a Sethisms talk tracks. There's probably you probably have 50 or 100 little talk tracks like what you just said right now, or the interesting thing. Dude, I'd pay money for that. Does that make sense? I think that is really incredibly valuable, because what you're doing is you're opening a piece in people's brains to allow this conversation to happen through those talk tracks, and they're worth money, right? So write them up.
I appreciate that. I've thought about it. I've been teaching this negotiation class for 10 years and I've never read a negotiation book in my life. It's just my observation about what works and what doesn't. Right?
Okay, write that shit down, Seth.
Yeah.
Write it down. And then I'm telling you, I will be your first buyer, because those talk tracks are, negotiation talk tracks are, they open doors to other interesting conversations.
Exactly.
And it's incredibly valuable.
Yeah, like I said, it's storytelling, and again, I'm not a big script person, but if you don't know the tent poles of conversation and then weave them in the right time and place. So yes, a lot of this is script, but I don't just have a rote script. I'm talking to every single person differently and using from, Rob's talking about my catalog of stories and isms. I'm using them at the right time based on the conversation and based on what people need to be communicated on in that moment, right?
So Seth, I thank you so much for coming on. I love the idea of co-opting another agent. And the one thing I had this the biggest thing I took away from was one of the biggest challenges that I see from watching people is so often they don't have an agent. They're negotiating against their own agent, right? Because they don't trust their own agent. And so when you talked way back about earning that trust and gaining that credibility, right? That's just so fundamental for the negotiation, is your client has to allow you to negotiate on their behalf.
Well, that's the first negotiation.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I thank you. We could be on here for an hour. I appreciate, this takeaway. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us, Seth.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Love you
Yeah.
guys. And anytime. And this was a
Thank you,
lot of fun.
Seth.
Thank you so much, Seth.
Yeah. Guys, hope you enjoyed it. Little masterclass, mini masterclass. Seth, I'll be first in line. I know that this is jiu-jitsu, lots of different moving parts, but those talk tracks are valuable because they can help people. Okay,
Of course. I appreciate that. Thanks a lot, guys.
take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Next Tuesday, we're going to be joined by Paul Dominic, Paulie D, who was the #1 ERE agent in the world down in Destin, Florida. Paul is speaking of jiu-jitsu, he is
that's right.
Jiu-jitsu champion. He's a black belt, runs Ironmans, just passionate, motivated guy talking about how to create an indomitable mindset. Also just a great agent. You can get real tactical with him on how he shows up in his community. So he's going to be joining us next week. And then
Like a monster.
One of our favorites, Tara Carter, is going to be another incredible luxury agent from South Florida, from Fort Lauderdale, is going to be joining us on February 18th. Yeah.
Thank you. Take care, guys.
Thank you, everybody.